All right, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thanks for being with us this morning. I'm going to do announcements at the beginning and at the end, so hopefully I won't miss anyone in terms of when you guys come on. So a couple big things that I want you to be aware of this week. Number one, we have agent training going on Monday through Friday this week and next week. Make sure to pay attention to your calendar invites on those. Sometimes they're at different times. We have 2 sessions next week that are in person at the 16th Street office. So just be aware of those. Tomorrow, we're having a really interesting conversation with Phil Kirk and Silva Zhang. And it's about being a good neighbor and what does it mean to kind of inhabit neighborhoods well. So I think it's going to be amazing. I hope you guys can make it to it. And then the other big thing that I want you to be aware of is the grand opening of the Bottle Works office is happening this Friday from 2 to 5 p.m. It'll be open house style, so you guys can kind of just drop in whenever you want. There'll be food, there'll be drinks, there'll be plat agents hanging together, which we haven't got to do in a really long time. So hope you can make it. I think that's all in terms of announcements. So I am going to turn it over to our guest, Patrick. He is the Director of Enrollment and Options at IPS, and he's graciously agreed to be here with us today and educate us on IPS and how it works. So Patrick, welcome. Can you start with just telling us who you are and how you got into the job and maybe what you love about IPS? And also, where are you? It looks beautiful.
Hi, good morning. I'm Patrick. I'm in my backyard. I got a quarantine puppy, as many of us ill-advisedly decided to. Mine is happier when she's outside my back deck. And if I end up with no flowers at the end of this meeting, it is all of your fault, because normally I try to watch her, but it's a free-for-all right now, so fingers crossed. My name is Patrick Carroll. I am like Rosie said, the Director of Enrollment for IPS. I came to IPS about 5 years ago, 4.5, 5 years ago. I'd worked as a teacher, I'd worked as an administrator, worked in education nonprofits, and a number of other roles, and to be with the district because I had never specifically worked for IPS. I had taught down in Carolina. So I'm really excited to be in this role. I'm curious, so does Platt just work within a specific geography? Because it's I see sign specifically in the IPS boundaries, but like, do you guys work across all of central Indiana, or what's your geography?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say about 80% of our transactions happen within or have an Indianapolis address. So most happen within that 465 loop. And then we do about 20% of our business in the surrounding counties.
Okay. Great. So then lots of you all in our district boundaries. I'll show you an actual map. It is an insane map that actually is very historically racist and gerrymandered, unfortunately, and so it is a complex, as you all know from Unigov, I'm sure. It is a complex history that led to the boundary that we have, but I'm sure you all saw quite a bit in our boundary, and so I'm excited you guys are interested in learning more about what IPS has to offer. I'm going to share my screen. I sent in the chat a link to the presentation that I'm going to go through. So you all are welcome to pull that up on your screen now or afterwards. Within the presentation, I have lots of links embedded. So for example, I'm going to show you the map of the boundary. If you literally click on that map, it will then take you to an interactive Google map where you can type in an address and find out if you're in the IPS boundary or not. And if you are, what the neighborhood school is and all of those sorts of things. So as we go through, anything and everything I reference is in this deck that I'm going to walk through. So I'm going to start with a quiz, and I tried to do it. When I was a teacher, we did not have fancy technology and one-to-one devices. So all of the like Pear Deck stuff, I failed at. So apologies. So I'm just going to call on one of you randomly. So get ready. Then we're going to talk about the IPS family of schools, elementary and middle school, high school, and then how families actually go about enrolling in IPS, especially if you have clients that are looking to do that right away. I want you to have those resources. So starting with the quiz, I am going to randomly call on, let's see, it's not showing me people's names, and I know Rosie's name. So Rosie, which of the following is an IPS high school?
Okay, 90% sure it's Crispus Attucks.
Does anyone else have thoughts? Agree or disagree? And I'll give you a hint, she is not fully correct.
Didn't Heron just become part of IPS?
Nailed it. Tell me your name.
My name's Amy.
Amy, thank you so much. You're right. So IPS is a weird school system. A lot of people think of traditional districts as school systems run their own schools directly. And that is true of IPS, and it's historically been true. But we also run what are called innovation schools. And these are schools where we partner with an outside organization to run a school. And so our board enters a contract with their board. And so a school like Heron High School or Purdue Polytech, KIPP, or a number of other schools that have a variety of different offerings are technically IPS schools, but our board is under a contract with their board and they run the schools. Heron is a great example of a school like that people don't even think, but is actually under the IPS umbrella of schools. And as you go on, you'll see that this umbrella is actually surprisingly large and offers a really cool array of options within the district. So Amy, good catch on that. Next one, and I'm not seeing folks' names. So Rosie, can you coolly pick on someone for this next one? Which of the following is not offered by IPS within the district?
I love calling out agents. Joel Matthews, what do you got for us?
I am playing with my screen and I cannot see what is being shared here. Hold on.
Okay, Joel, I'm gonna call on someone else. Stephanie Hickman, I feel like you might actually know the answer to this.
I can't believe you called on me. I don't know. Is it Mandarin? I'm not aware of the Mandarin program if there is one.
So Stephanie, this one was a trick question. They are all offered by.
Yeah.
Oh, can you guys hear me? They are all offered by IPS. So within our IB programs, our baccalaureate programs, our Center for Inquiry schools, we offer Mandarin Chinese. We've got 3 different Montessori program schools across the district. In most cases, Montessori is a super expensive private school option. IPS offers 3 of those schools for free. We have a school called Thrival, which is a high school. And during that high school experience, students go on study abroad experiences. In fact, their culminating junior year study abroad experience is a full semester at no cost to the students. They went to Thailand 2 years ago before the pandemic, and now they're hoping to go to Latin America after the pandemic. So free to students to study abroad. And then they also have freshman, sophomore, and senior year shorter experiences abroad. We have a whole host of experiences where you can leave high school with industry certifications. You can get a high-paying job right out of high school if you don't choose to go on to college. We've got an international baccalaureate program that ranges K through 12. We've got 2 different schools that offer a Spanish-English immersion. And Spanish-English immersion is where, for example, you might take a math class in Spanish. So it is full language immersion. We have a robotics team that recently went to the world competition, again, pre-pandemic. So hopefully they will continue to live up to that. So lots of really cool things happening in the IPS district. And Stephanie, I appreciate you chiming in with that. This is the district boundary. So as you can see, it encompasses all of Center Township, but then there are wings east, west, north, and south that capture parts of other townships. And so it is an odd boundary, and there are holes in it and all sorts of craziness. If you click on the link that's embedded, this will take you to and can you guys still see my page? It should be open, a Google Maps link. So this takes you to a Google Maps link so that if you have a family that is looking for it at a specific address and they want to know what would be my neighborhood elementary school if I were to live here. And neighborhood elementary school means the school that your family has the right to attend, period, just because of your address. There's no such thing as being too full for you. You will always be students given that address. You can go to this link and you can type in any address. So if I type in our downtown address, 120 East Walnut Street, this will zoom in on the map and you'll see the pink, and I can click on the pink and it will show me that this is Urban Act boundary. And so that is the school that the family who lived at our downtown office, which they can't, but if they lived at that downtown office, they would have the guaranteed right to enroll. We have neighborhood schools for all of our elementary school students and our middle school students. So I'm going to zoom in on this map again and show you the entire map. I zoomed out too much, sorry. So we have neighborhood schools for our, and I'm currently showing you elementary schools, and then we also have neighborhood schools for our middle schools. And so you can use this map to find what a client's neighborhood school might be from elementary and middle school. We, in addition to, so then I also told you that I'd show you where families can actually register. So a family that wants to enroll right away in their neighborhood school can go to myips.org, and that link is embedded here. That link takes you directly to the page where they register for their school. And so then this is how they can enroll directly in their neighborhood school. We also have pre-K. Pre-K is 100% free. It's an all-day pre-K. It's a really great option for families, and it's not determined by where the family lives, because it might be more convenient for them to enroll in the pre-K that's closer to where they work. So these are all of the locations where we have pre-K across the district. We've got, I think, over 900 seats, pre-K seats across the district, 100% free. They're given out through a lottery system. So if you click on this link, again, embedded here, this shows you all of the information that families need to know about our pre-K. There are special considerations, for example, like out-of-boundary families are not eligible for IPS pre-K unless they apply to one of our Montessori pre-K sites. And in that case, they would get in after the in-boundary families would get in. So lots of good information there, but I won't go into much detail on that. So pre-K, next we have K through 8 choice. And K through 8 choice in high school are all examples of choice schools. These are schools that you get to choose which school you go to. To do that, you go through a lottery-based system. I can see some of your faces, so raise your hand if you've heard of some of our choice schools. Center for Inquiry is an example. Montessori is another. Butler Lab, Theodore Potter, Spanish English Immersion. Yeah, so I see some hands. A lot of families care a lot about how the process works to get into these schools. It is a general lottery, but you'll see there are a range of priorities listed. So families who live in the district, that one's listed first, get in before families that live outside the district. Then families who have at the school get in before families who don't. Families who live in within a half-mile radius of the school get in before families who don't. And on this map on the left, you can see the radii drawn for each one of our schools. And there is a link embedded in here to those actual maps. So if you have a family that wants to know, am I in the CFI 70 proximity, you now have the map where you can type in the address and tell them whether they are. We've got zone priority, where applicant meaning you applied the previous year, and then IPS employees get priority to get into our school. So that's for K through 8, and we have a range of options. I mentioned some of them. Our CFI programs offer international baccalaureate. Theodore Potter is a Spanish English immersion. And we've got a huge range of choice schools that families get really excited about. These schools you don't have guaranteed rights to get into. It is a lottery. And then finally, high school, and this is new as of the 2018-19 school year, high school is 100% choice. And if you click on this picture, it is a link to the actual document that is shown as a caption. And this shows all of the IPS high schools. There are actually 10 of them. And that includes schools like Heron Riverside, Purdue Polytech, and other education schools that IPS is partnering with. And this shows all of those different options. Hopefully it'll load on my screen. And each one of these schools has college and career programs. So if you are a student who is really interested in becoming a doctor, you would want to look at Chris Pasatics because they have a health science academy, and you can come out of that with pre-nursing credentials and on hands-on experience practicing nursing and doctor and other medical skills. And so each school has a range of programs like that. So if you want to go into computer coding, you might want to look at George Washington, that has an information technology academy. If you're really interested in the performing arts, you might want to look at Shortridge, that has our visual and performing arts program. And so this is where you can find information about each one of our schools and what their specific college and career offerings are. Like I said, this is 100% choice. So any student from anywhere in the district can choose any one of these schools, and we'll help those students get to those schools. So that's high school. Then the next thing we need to talk about is Enroll Indy. So for all of those, what we call choice options, which would be pre-K, the choice schools at kindergarten through 8th grade, and all of our high schools use Enroll Indy. That's our nonprofit partner that operates the lottery-based system. And so the link here takes you to Enroll Indy and their page for families to apply. So to back up quickly, we have two types of schools. We've got neighborhood schools, where you can enroll guaranteed based on your address for elementary and middle school. And you don't need to use Enroll Indy. You can go straight to the page to register and get started. And then for all of our schools that count as choice schools, pre-K, K through 8 choice schools, and high school, you have to go through enrollment. And so families that want to exercise that option, which a lot of families find that they do, they would need to go through Enroll Indy too. The only other thing I wanted to mention, and I don't want to spend much time on this because it is frankly too far in the weeds and what I've parents about the quality of the school, not the governance of the school, but you may occasionally get questions about what are innovation schools. I think so. Oh gosh, now Jill, I think it was that Heron, for example, is an innovation school. Amy, I got your name wrong. I'm sorry. Anyway, whoever was correct on Heron knew about innovation school. So on the left column, IPS operates traditional schools like most districts across the country where we directly operate schools. So there are tons of examples of that. Williams School, number 49 on the southwest side, or another example, Meredith Nicholson on the northwest side, School 96, are two examples of traditional schools that happen to be K through 8 neighborhood schools. We also, as I mentioned, offer a range that we directly run of choice schools. So those would be Center for Inquiry schools, the Butler Lab schools, Crispus Attucks High School. We also, on the right column, partner with operators of schools, and they are the ones that directly run the school, but they are underneath the IPS umbrella. Some of those schools are neighborhood schools where families have a guaranteed rate based on their address. So an example would be Global Prep School 44, is a Spanish English immersion school that is also a neighborhood school. Matchbook School 63, which is a super cool technology-infused blended learning approach. That is an innovation school operated in partnership with IPS that also happens to serve a neighborhood. But then we also have innovation schools that are choice schools. So KIPP or Heron or Polytech would all be examples of those types of schools. So if you get questions, because IPS is kind of on the leading edge of these innovative partnerships, innovation schools, these are some examples just so you have some general understanding. That's the broad overview that I provide. The rest of the time, however much that is, 5 minutes to 20 minutes, I'm happy to stay on however much time you need me. I just wanted to answer any questions you have or any questions you commonly get from clients. How can I help?
So good, Patrick. Thank you. Your audio is going a little bit in and out. Is there a better option?
Okay, I'm just using my computer. Is it better?
Oh, that's a million times better. Yes,
Wish I had not been doing the headphones the whole time. I apologize.
No worries. I think we got the idea. That's very helpful. I'm going to start you off with questions, just because I think some of us are more familiar with IPS than others. And so I want to make sure everyone is kind of on the same page. You had mentioned earlier about some of the history of IPS and some of the racist practices and gerrymandering that happened. Can you kind of catch us up to speed on how that happened, recognizing that real estate is an industry that is also has a lot of faults in that area? I think we would all just, love to be educated on that.
Sure. So this goes back time of UNIGOV a couple decades ago when there was an effort to take the city and the county and merge them together. And as I'm sure many of you know, For the most part, that happened, but one of the very stark exceptions of unifying the city and the county was with the school systems. At the time, just like there were multiple municipalities in the county, there were also multiple school systems, and the effort to combine the municipality into one, there was huge resistance to doing the same thing to the school system. And so ultimately, a series of lines were drawn for our school system and other school systems. And as you can see on the map that I'm going to pull up, especially on the northeast side of town, there are some pretty insane lines. So you can see the district's boundary goes pretty far to the east, but in very weird ways. Similarly to the south side, this random island that's not included in the east side, there are random islands. And if you look more closely at the demographics of those communities, you can see very clearly that most of the time those lines were drawn to include families of color in the IPS boundary and exclude families of color from other surrounding townships. And so that is a series of boundaries that we have inherited that exacerbate segregation. Now, as we've seen housing patterns and housing stock change over time, that has slightly changed, but we certainly do see an inheritance of that. And that was very, UNIGA was not successful in convincing families to unify a school system, in part, if being honest, because of fears of integration by race that many families.
Yeah, that's so good. Thanks for touching on that, Patrick.
Mhm.
We had a question come in through the chat from Natanya. She asked, are you able to talk more in depth on enrollment guidelines for schools like CFI?
Yes, and I'm actually going to reference you. So in this presentation, if you look at these different priorities, this is, any picture is always going to be a link. So if you click on that link, I have a document embedded here that has way too many details about how the enrollment and application process works. So this talks through the application process and the timeline, the two different application rounds and when each application cycle is due. It has the different priorities that I mentioned. It has a definition of priority actually means. And here is a link to, you can see there's this link that says view proximity boundaries here. So if you click on that link, a map will open up. And so if you want to know, for example, if your specific address or a client's specific address is in a proximity boundary or a zone boundary for a school, you can actually do that on this interactive map. You'll also see, so this is a good example, these different blue colors. So if you just look at the different circles, these are the proximity boundaries. So you can zoom in and say CFI 84, for example, on the northeast, the north side of the city, am I in the proximity boundary for that school? But the other thing that's important is if you look at these blue bands, families in the darkest band on the north side of the city are in the zone for CFI 84. So they will get into CFI 84 before any family that lives south of 38th Street, because any family south of 38th Street, north of 10th, is in CFI 27's essentially zone. And then the south side of the city, south of 10th Street, is in CFI 2's zone. And so there's another example of if you live in Heron Morton, for example, which is in CFI 27's zone, but you want to apply to CFI 2, you can. You'll just get in after everyone in CFI 2's zone. So that map and that those sets of zones exist for Butler Lab, which you can see in red, as well as our Montessori schools. Any set of schools that have multiple are all listed here. And then back to this document. So in addition to the priorities, we also have transportation rules. We also have a gifted program. Seidner Academy is a school that students test into based on their gifted status. Information about that, and then a complete list of all of our choice schools. So has the answers to all of the questions. Are there specific questions that you have? Because beyond that, it is not CFI, for example, none of our schools other than Seidner are schools that you test into. Everyone is eligible. You just have to match through the lottery.
Natanya, was there anything else that you wanted surrounding CFI? Okay. Patrick, we had another question come through from Minna. She says, what are the rough overall statistics on the lottery as far as percentage of families that apply and families who are actually accepted / not?
Yeah. Overall, 90% of families who apply get matched. Now, you can apply to up to 10 schools. So obviously, the more schools you apply to and say you are willing to go to, the higher that percentage goes, and the fewer, the lower that percentage goes. We do have a number of schools that have very, very high demand. So CFI 84, CFI 70, Butler Lab School 60, Center for School 2 are our 4 highest demanded schools. So a family that just applies to CFI 84 and nothing else is certainly not going to have a 90% chance of getting matched because those schools have much lower match rates. But on balance, especially for family number of applications, families tend to apply to between 2.8 and 3.2 schools. So roughly 3 schools. So 90% of families who apply to 3 schools are very likely to get one of those matches. So it's a high rate, but we do have a couple schools that have very low match percentages because of how high demand they are.
That's so helpful. Patrick, just from someone who doesn't have kids and is totally not in this world, like how would parents go about finding out more about the schools? Like, can they go take tours of a school? Is it like meet with administrators? Like, how does that whole process work?
Yes. So if you click on the link for Enroll Indy, take you to Enroll Indy's webpage. We've tried to make Enroll Indy the one-stop shop for any family looking for any information about any of our schools. So you'll find a host of resources here. I would say the most helpful one here is if you go to the Find Schools section, they have a school finder. And that is a map that shows every different school, what type of school, and then each school has a profile. So you can learn more about the type of school, the different academic offerings they have, what the rules are for enrolling in schools. So you can filter that by grade level or by interest that you have, or if transportation is particularly important. There are a whole bunch of filters. And then in addition so if, for example, we go to Center for Inquiry School 27, we click on that. This has information about their school. You can also find information about the lottery, and you can also find information about whether or not they have open houses that are coming up. Currently, we are not offering in-person open houses. Typically, we do 2 school tours. Currently, you can find links to how you can go on a virtual school tour. But once we hopefully are fully open next year, post-pandemic, fingers crossed, we'd post here online when the different open houses and school tours are, as you narrow down and want to see in person what school options are like.
That's so good. Patrick, can you talk to us a little bit about what the last year has been like working for IPS, and then maybe what are the hopes for next year? Is the hope to be, completely in person, or what does that look like?
Yeah, IPS this year has been a mix of, obviously as a state, there were times when we were ordered by the state health department and the governor to be fully virtual. There were times in between essentially Thanksgiving and January when everyone had to be virtual. We started the year fully virtual, and then most of the rest of the time we have offered families the option of either being full virtual, and we offered that as an option, or being in person. For most of the time when we were able to be in person, our kindergarten through 6th graders were there every day, and our high school and our middle school students were there on a rotating basis. So Monday and Tuesday you were in person, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday you were virtual, or vice versa, you were flipped. So it's been a crazy year for us, and I think everyone. Our hope, we are now 100% virtual at all grade levels. And so unless something were to happen where the city or the state would, and we had another significant outbreak, our hope would be to continue that into next year and be 100% in person for any family that wanted to take that option, hopefully for all of next year.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm sure a lot of kids and parents are happy to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, truth be told, and we're seeing this across the city and across the country, we are seeing a lot of learning loss. But more concerningly, we are seeing a lot of social emotional needs that students have as a result of this really insane year and a half. IPS disproportionately serves families from low-income communities. And as you can imagine, both the learning and the social emotional challenges are exacerbated when you are living in a situation where poverty presents more challenges. And so we as a district and surrounding townships and charters and privates are really trying to respond to both the learning loss that's really concerning, but even more so the added instability that families face. The increase in the number of families experiencing homelessness, for example, significantly increased. The increase in families who experience trauma due to loss of job, loss of income, loss of family members is exponentially growing. And so as a district, we're really trying to figure out the best ways to respond to that. And that's going to be a multi-year.
Yeah. Guys, I have one more question for Patrick, but I wanted to make sure you guys got the chance to ask whatever you want. What kind of questions do you guys get from your clients? This is a good time to kind of vet them by someone who actually knows the answer. Anything you would like to ask? Okay, I won't let the awkward silence reign forever.
Sorry,
So, Pat, oh.
It's Tanya. I was trying to unmute. Sorry. I think for me, the biggest question I get is the enrollment piece. Is it lottery? Is it regular enrollment? So that find your school, and also knowing what schools are available and how the enrollment process is presented is super helpful. So thank you.
For sure, Natanya. I agree. Those links are kind of invaluable. Thanks for sharing those, Patrick. My last question is, I'm guessing that you are the person who gets called when parents are pissed off that their kids don't get into the school they want. Am I correct in that assumption?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Could you tell us, I mean, obviously, we as realtors interact with a lot of parents who are trying to make the right decisions and what homes to live in. I guess, is there anything that you would want to impart to the realtor community so that you get less pissed off phone calls? Is there any way that we can help you maybe spread the word or educate? Yeah, parents.
The biggest thing I would say is most of the angriest families that end up at me are angry because they had one school that they find acceptable and they didn't get in. And what I always challenge those families to do is to think more about why is that one school the only school that they could consider. Most of the time, it is because they have heard good things from friends about that school, and they allow assumptions about IPS more broadly to dominate their thoughts about the rest of schools. I mentioned there are a couple schools, Inquiry 84, Center for Inquiry 70, Center for Inquiry 2, and 60 are on the acceptable schools list. What I have found again and again is that when families go back and look at a couple other schools, they find some really interesting options that they didn't think they would find acceptable. The most obvious and hilarious example of that is Cold Spring. It is a school that is not on families' kind of typical acceptable list of schools, which is deeply problematic in its own. Happy to talk more about that because we're using very coded language, but oftentimes what we're talking about are families that want a certain population of students by race, comfortable with something outside of that. And so let's call a spade a spade. But when a family looks outside of that and they find a school like Cold Spring or George Washington Carver Montessori School 87, both examples of schools that are reflective by race of Indianapolis, which is what I think many of us want for our students, and are fantastic schools. But Cold Spring, for example, is on 42 acres of land, is an environmental science school. Students go out into the back where there is a creek that runs through. They go seining for little critters. They learn about, I mean, it's such a cool school that if families are willing to look beyond what they assume is only set of options, they find really, really cool schools beyond that initial list. And so that's where I push families. Frankly, some families can't be pushed, and I'm okay with their anger because my job is not to respond to that anger. It is to create a fair system and as many excellent schools as possible that families are able to access.
So good. So I lied. I have one more question for you that I thought of while you were talking about this. Probably one of the most infuriating things that I run into in the industry is, people wanting to move outside of IPS districts. Yes, Joel, there is time. Drop it in the chat, or I'll grab you after I'm done. So yeah, people wanting to move outside of IPS districts because there's not good schools downtown. I don't think that's the case, but I'm sure you've run into this before, like having the job that you have. I'm curious, like, what is your response to people? I always kind of struggle with, I feel like I come off really defensive, but I'm like, there are good schools, like back up. Yeah, how do you respond to that? How do you kind of rebuff that criticism?
Yeah, I mean, two things I'd say. Number one is, it is true that IPS is working very hard to make sure that every neighborhood and every community has an excellent school. And that is a goal that we have yet to fully achieve. We are continuing to try to improve our schools, and there are schools that are continuing to improve, but have a ways to go. And so I don't want to dismiss the criticism out of hand, because there are families that are not at the school that they should be yet. And that's something that we are very actively working on. But I would say at the same time, as someone who has spent a lot of time in a lot of our schools, it is really exciting to see very concrete examples of families making choices that counter exactly what you're saying, Rosie, of families who have found a neighborhood school. Meredith Nicholson School 96, for example, on the Northwest side, is a school that has 40% of their student population comes from outside of their boundary. That's how much families want that school, and they won't get transportation. They just have seen how great of a school that is. And we have a lot of neighborhood schools like that draw students in from outside of their boundary, outside of the district boundary, in fact. Our choice schools, I think, are really obvious examples of that. We have families from outside of the district desperately trying to get in. And we have a lot of those schools that do not fill in the lottery because families don't initially give them consideration, but then when they find out about them, they're thrilled. And so they are schools that are very easy to get into. They are guaranteed to get into if you apply in the lottery. But I would also look at a school like on the kind of near west side, Global Prep School 44 is a neighborhood school that is dual language, Spanish, English. Fantastic, welcoming school that 35% of their student body comes from outside of their neighborhood because of how many people want that school. And so I think if you look a layer or two deeper beyond your typical assumptions, there are a lot of really exciting things happening that, in addition to the excitement, I think, of just living in the urban core, schools can be a part of that as a selling point.
So good. Joel, you had a question. Speak up, sir.
Yes. You guys kind of both touched on where I was going with that, but I was going to dig in a little more. Kind of around the perception of IPS. So just being a Indy native, local East Side native, I just grew up with, even 25 years ago, it was like, the townships have better education, and so it's like we grew up technically in IPS district, bused to some of the township schools, elementary on up. And I know like there's been a ton that's changed since that period of time. I feel like this is really helpful, just kind of catching up to speed on some of those alternative options. But and I know a lot of those IPS schools have shifted, or some have shut down, like Broad Ripple, for example. And there's been some shifts with that. But yeah, I think they're, from working with clients, especially either who are relocating from the suburbs into town, or coming in from outside of town, the buzz is still that old perception. And so I'm curious to kind of hear a little bit more maybe about how you have those conversations, or is that Enroll Indy the main resource you'd point us to dig into some of those alternative options and that are also newer?
Yeah, that's a good question, Joel. And I think I'm struggling fully with how to respond because in the back of my mind, there is the reality that in the United States, so much of what we talk about, certainly in real estate, I know you guys deal with this all the time, but also in education, has its roots in race and assumptions that people make. So I'll give you a really concrete example because I know discussions about race are, as a district, we are unwilling to shy away from them. So I'm going to dive right in. I'm going to start with a national statistic on research around families' choices in enrollment. And what we find is if we look specifically at white families, when the student population of students of color raises above 30% at a school, you can predict the rate at which white families will leave, will depart. It is persistent and consistent over time. And IPS as a district serves a large population of students of color. And with that come a lot of assumptions. I think historically, some of those are rooted in IPS's challenges as a district, if we're totally honest. But now I think as we continue to make very innovative changes, the kind of innovative changes, frankly, that nationally the district is getting a lot of praise for really innovative partnerships and really pushing the envelope on how we improve schools and options and opportunities for families and equity. We've got an explicit racial equity policy. A lot of the things that we are doing, I think, are gaining a lot of national attention, but certainly locally, we have inherited a lot of the assumptions that people make based on past challenges that the district has earned the negative assumptions for. But as that starts to change, I think what we are left with more and more are assumptions that are often rooted in issues of race. And so I think what I have found is the only way to attack that is to attack that very head on, is to address the fact that people assume IPS doesn't have great schools, but have actually never been in any of our schools. And so point them to all of the many opportunities where they can actually go into schools and see that that is not the case. And I think, you can cite all of the different things that we offer or all of the different opportunities. But I guess at some point, families have to be willing to either challenge the assumptions that they're making or not. And that's a really difficult conversation. And I know you often the ones in the really tricky position of having that conversation. And I know you do, and I appreciate that so much. And so I guess maybe Joel, the follow-up for you is, are there specific resources or things that I can provide to help as you are providing that challenge to families that may be resting on some assumptions that need challenging?
Patrick, was that a question for Joel?
Or for anyone, yeah. Are there additional resources that help in challenging families that I can provide? What would be helpful from me?
I think the Enroll Indie is a great source, but if there's anything you could send us on, like, what you mentioned of people actually getting into schools and seeing what that's like. And I mean, I know this year is different because of COVID and all that stuff, but I think if there's, a fair that happens once a year where, people can go around and meet all the schools or, something like that, if there's anything that is a repeatable event that we could point clients to, that would be so helpful.
Yeah. I'll do two things. I'll send the Enroll-Indie match data from the last several years so you can have the percent match rates. IPS also in November holds a showcase of schools. That's exactly what you described, Rosie, an opportunity for all families to come and meet with every school in person if they want to learn more about their different options. So I'll send information about that as well.
That would be amazing. Thank you. Amy just asked the question, moving forward from COVID, does IPS plan to continue to offer online options?
We are currently evaluating those options. So right now we're actually surveying all of our families who have opted into 100% virtual to see what their interest is in a continuing online option. Right now, the version of online that we are doing is, I think, really robust and interesting, but it's really difficult for teachers. So currently you are assigned to a class and that teacher does online and does in person. And I just don't think in good conscience we can continue to ask teachers to do that of double prep. And so what we're trying to figure out is if we do continue to opt for 100% virtual, can we continue to do a version of that? Or do we do a 100% virtual school? The obvious downside there is there are real benefits to virtual students having interactions with in-person students and having that social emotional cross-pollination. And so we're trying to figure out, what do families want? What are we able to staff? There's also the consideration before COVID, if you did virtual, you were funded at 85% of your regular funding. And so what are the financial implications for us offering virtual in the future? So we're working through all of that, and we're hoping to make a decision in the next several weeks.
Great question, Amy. Anything else for Patrick, folks?
Well, thank you all. I appreciate your work. I appreciate your interest in IPS. It's really exciting for me. And I appreciate you having those difficult conversations that we made reference to.
Yeah, Patrick, right back at you. Thank you for doing the work you're doing, and for also just like speaking boldly about the history of IPS and where we're at today. I appreciate your realness. So thanks, everybody. Join us tomorrow for What It Means to Be a Good Neighbor, and for the grand opening this Friday from 2 to 5. Have a great day, everyone.